You were actively involved, I presume, in the Bayway litigation itself, in directing it or supervising it.
Yes.
And under your supervision, after a 55-day damages-only trial, there was $2.6 billion of primary restoration and $6.3 billion, for a total of about $9 billion of compensatory damages that was put forward before the judge. That's accurate sum, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And we know, for the record, the matter was settled for $225 million, or that's at least the proposal, correct?
That is the proposed settlement.
Okay.
That's correct.
Just looking at that $225 million, give or take about $60 million of that, as the AG said, would be attorney fees for outside counsel?
I believe it's more like 45 million, 40 to 45 million, something like that.
Okay, then the court will ultimately approve that, and $50 million of that sum would be, under the current law, earmarked for environmental purposes, correct?
Yes.
As it relates to the sum that the issues that have been raised about the cleanup, that beyond this, Exxon, if you will, has to clean up the site. Now, that cleanup had its genesis in a consent decree that went back to 1991, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we've been talking about, cleanup. There's a significant difference between restoration versus remediation, right? Remediation, if we spilled some coffee on the rug, remediation might be putting a paper towel on top of it and to sop up the coffee. Whereas restoration would be to put a new rug in. That's, give or take, a good lay description of that?
Yeah, if you want to go there, yeah, sure.
Okay. So the damages that the state put forward as it related to restoration, because it couldn't be done on that site just because of the depth of the environmental catastrophe, was that sum would be about $2.6 billion if one was to go to full restoration, correct?
Not sure I understand your question.
Well, that the primary restoration by our expert, your expert, you directed the litigation, said that it would cost $2.6 billion to restore that property. Primary restoration.
I prefer not to go too deep into these answers because this is still a settlement. It's still being litigated. I prefer not to go there.
Well,
if I can.
I think that is public record. So then, as it relates to what Exxon has spent thus far on remediation, but basically on cleanup, is about $260 million.
That's correct.
Okay, and that property probably won't be cleaned up to a certain specification for probably another 20 or 30 years. Would that be fair to say?
I don't know the time frame on it.
And it's the DEP that is responsible as it relates to directing as to what would be appropriate in capping or doing something other than full restoration of the property, but remediation, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, over and above this settlement that we discussed with Bayway, there's an additional 16 sites that we discussed with the Attorney General's office. We got a list of all 16 of those sites. One of them includes Paulsboro, which is 950 acres that had contaminated groundwater and wetlands, as well as MTB piece. Now, I appreciate MTB was held in reserve as it relates to some of the settlements, but how much was it that we were claiming in that case as it related to NRD damages in Paulsboro? What was our case like, as it was $9 billion in Exxon?
No, I mean, I don't have the number on that. What we claimed originally. I have no idea.
Well, there's and through the chair, I would like to request, as it relates to, as we're supposed to be looking at the appropriateness of the whole Bayway settlement, knowing the sum of $225 million, we should have the value as it relates to those other 16 sites. That's just logical. Can the commissioner commit that we'll be provided with that information so we could make good decisions?
I mean, all this, I'm glad to cover anything that doesn't compromise any of our cases. I'm glad to have that, discuss those confidentially with you, but I need the Attorney General's office to be sitting with me and anything that talks about cases going forward, including any of these cases that are any of those sites.
Well, I appreciate it, and I've been respectful of the two of you and what your professional obligations are, but it becomes very frustrating for a public not to understand what we quote-unquote gave away into the settlement. I don't even mean to use that incendiary language. But if we can't understand the depth of the issues on all 16 of those sites, how can we make intelligent decisions as to whether or not that would be an appropriate overall deal? And there's just logic to that, and I hope that there'd be reconsideration for the good of the public on that point.